All right, let's talk about a story you've probably never heard, but honestly, it's a deeply American one. It's about a nation that was created as an experiment, a nation that got caught up as a pawn in a global game, and a dream that just turned into an absolute nightmare. This is the story of how the US broke Liberia. So let's just start with a mystery. It's 1985. You've got this former Liberian government official sitting in a Massachusetts jail. He's waiting to be extradited for supposedly embezzling almost $1 million. So how does a guy like that just walk out? I mean, no alarms, no big dramatic struggle. A car is just waiting for him, and poof, he's gone. This isn't some spy movie plot. This is a real-life event that kicks off an unbelievable tragedy. That man's name, Charles Taylor. And his bizarre escape isn't just some weird historical footnote. No, it's the prologue to one of the most brutal civil wars in modern African history. To really get how Liberia completely fell apart, we have to start right here, with this very strange escape. What in the world really happened that night in Massachusetts? Okay, so the official story sounds like something out of a movie. Sawed-off bars, knotted bed sheets, the whole 9 yards. But, the details just don't really add up. See, 4 other inmates who escaped with him, they're all caught almost immediately. But Taylor, he vanishes without a trace. He even claimed later that someone just opened his cell door. And here's the kicker. U.S. intelligence later admitted Taylor was working for the CIA, which of course led to this massive rumor that his escape wasn't luck, it was a planned operation. So you gotta ask, right? Why would the US potentially spring a guy like Charles Taylor from jail? Well, the answer is kind of tangled up in the very creation of Liberia itself. So let's do that. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. You see, before Liberia was ever a country, it was an idea, a very American idea. It was dreamed up as this radical and frankly deeply flawed solution to America's original sin, slavery. So back in 1816, this group called the American Colonization Society gets formed. Their big mission? To solve the problem of a growing population of free black people by sending them back to Africa, a continent most of them had never even seen. And the supporters of this idea were a really strange mix. You had clergy who thought it was a path to freedom, and you had slaveholders who just saw it as a way to get rid of a group they saw as a threat to their whole system. With backing from the U.S. government, the ACS got a hold of land using, let's just say, a combination of sketchy treaties and force. The first settlers get there in 1822, and they're hit with disease and a lot of hostility from the indigenous tribes who, understandably, saw them as invaders. This constant fighting actually forced the different settlements to band together, and in 1847, they declared independence. And just like that, Liberia became Africa's first modern republic. But here's the thing. This brand new republic, it was born with a huge fatal flaw. It was founded on these American ideals of liberty, but it ended up recreating the exact same system of oppression its founders had just escaped. I mean, if you read the Liberian Declaration of Independence, it sounds a lot like America's, talking about inalienable rights and all that. But the reality on the ground? A totally different story. From day one, full rights were only for the Americo-Liberian settlers. The huge indigenous majority, they weren't considered citizens in their own land. They were subjects. So what you ended up with were basically 2 different Liberias crammed into one country. You had the Americo-Liberian elite, who built a society that looked a lot like the American South. Western suits, secret societies, and all the political power held by one party, the true Whig Party. And for more than 100 years, they ruled over the indigenous population, who were totally shut out from power, and in some cases even subjected to forced labor. And this deep internal division was about to get a whole lot worse, thanks to a single mind-boggling number: 1 million acres. So, in 1926, the American company Firestone swoops in and gets this insane 99-year lease for a giant rubber plantation. This move effectively turned Liberia into a corporate state. Firestone became the biggest employer in the country, but the whole relationship was incredibly exploitative. Government officials would literally force indigenous people to go work on these plantations, and it got so bad that the League of Nations had to launch an investigation into what was basically a form of slavery. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. By the middle of the 20th century, the world splits into East and West, and Liberia, with its key location and its deep ties to the US, becomes this really crucial piece on the Cold War chessboard. Under President William Tubman, Liberia entered what looked like a golden age. The economy was booming, and Tubman even formally extended voting rights to the indigenous population. And in return, Liberia became Washington's most loyal friend in Africa. It hosted a huge CIA communications base and always voted with the US at the UN. It was a simple deal, really. Stability at home in exchange for total loyalty abroad.
But, you guessed it, that stability was just a thin veneer. The so-called reforms were mostly for show, just to keep the international community happy. Underneath it all, the old anger was still simmering, and the power structure hadn't changed one bit.
I mean, look at this. Even though indigenous folks could technically vote, virtually all the real power, political, economic, you name it, was still in the hands of that tiny Americo-Liberian elite. The true Vig Party still controlled everything. Land was still being taken for foreign companies, and the money was definitely not being shared.
And then everything just fell apart. In 1979, the government proposed a price hike on rice, the food everyone depends on, and massive riots erupted, showing just how angry people were. A year later, an indigenous soldier named Samuel Doe leads a bloody coup. He has the president and his cabinet assassinated right on a beach. And America's reaction to this gruesome violence? A warm embrace. Why? Because Doe was anti-communist, and in the Cold War, that was all that mattered. Doe's regime quickly spiraled into its own brutal, corrupt mess, and he made enemies of just about everyone. The stage was now perfectly set for the return of that guy from the beginning, the one from the Massachusetts jail, Charles Taylor. So, after his mysterious escape and getting some training in Libya, Taylor comes back on Christmas Eve 1989. With just a small group of rebels, he tapped into all that widespread hatred for Doe's regime, and the country just exploded into a horrifying civil war. Doe himself was eventually captured and brutally executed on camera. For the next 7 years, Liberia was just consumed by a war full of unspeakable atrocities and child soldiers. The conflict killed 200,000 people. That's 8% of the entire population. Finally, in 1997, a fragile peace deal was signed and they held elections. This was Charles Taylor's unofficial campaign slogan. People were literally chanting it in the streets. It is just a chilling window into the impossible choice the Liberian people were facing after so many years of unimaginable violence. It just makes you stop and think, right? Why? After all of that suffering, why on earth would anyone vote for the man who started the whole war? And the answer is just as tragic as the war itself. People didn't vote for Taylor because they thought he was a good leader. They voted for him because they were terrified. They believed he was the only one powerful enough to actually make the killing stop. It was a vote for peace, even if that meant electing the devil you know. Taylor won, with 75% of the vote. From the American Colonization Society to the Cold War embrace of a dictator and the, let's call it, convenient escape of a future warlord, U.S. actions have shaped Liberia at every single turn. And it leaves us with this one really heavy question. When a superpower helps create a nation in its own image, what responsibility does it bear for the flaws in that reflection?